Okay, we are looking at, again, Acts the 2nd chapter, and beginning in verse 22 in just a moment. We are, again, looking at an event where the church is about to be established. We have a large audience gathered on what special feast day? Pentecost. This is the day of Pentecost. And obviously a lot of people would be in Jerusalem for that feast. These would be primarily, of course, Jews. And as we have seen, the Holy Spirit comes upon the apostles, giving them the ability to speak in foreign languages they never studied before. And the audience was amazed because these men were of what nationality? The apostles. Galileans. Galileans were considered to be unlearned, if not downright backward. And that's sort of a biased attitude, obviously, of those of Judea, but it's sort of the attitude that a lot of folks have in Mississippi, right? That we're a bit backwards and don't know what's going on. I know when I lived in Tennessee and told those folks I was moving to Mississippi, they said, don't move down there. They don't have running water. They don't have paved roads, and all this kind of stuff. Well, I mean, they were sincere in saying that. They really thought that. So that's the perception some people have, and perceptions are a lot of times wrong. And, people who view us that way are wrong, and people, the Judeans who view the Galileans. Even though many Galileans might not have had the education some others did, in this case, the amazing thing was that here were men, wherever they were from, speaking fluently in languages they'd never studied before. And that was a miracle, and that caused everybody around to gather around to try to find out, how can this be? Curiosity is a wonderful thing at times, and certainly it was here. How can this thing be? How do we hear these men speaking in our languages the wonderful works of God? Some mockingly said what of the apostles? They were drunk. They were drunk, and obviously, as we've already said, you don't learn a foreign language by getting drunk. You may learn some things, but you don't learn a foreign language. And Peter stands up then and addresses the audience on that occasion, first of all explaining the situation that we are not drunk, verse 15, and then he quotes from what prophet? The prophet Joel. We looked at that Wednesday evening, Joel chapter 2. This is actually a fulfillment of prophecy, is what Peter says. And we'll not look at all that again, other than this is the explanation. We are not drunken, as some suppose. We are filled with the Holy Spirit. And now let me begin, he says, by telling you about the Lord, about Christ, about Jesus. And that's the bulk of his sermon. Adam, if you'll start us with verse 22 through 24.
You men of Israel, hear these words. Jesus of Nazareth, a man approved of God among you by miracles and wonders and signs, which God did by him in the midst of you, as you yourselves also know. Him, being delivered by the determinate counsel and foreknowledge of God, you have taken, and by wicked hands have crucified and slain, whom God hath raised up, having loosed the pains of death, because it was not possible that he should be holden of it.
All right, so let's backtrack to verse 22, addressing the men of Israel. And once again, that is not a slight toward women. Again, a lot of these words were understood to include whoever was assembled, male or female. So there's no ignoring any female individuals who were there, or non-Israelites who were there. It's not meant in that sense at all. So Peter has told the listeners what they wanted to know. They wanted to know, to be given an explanation of what they were seeing and hearing. He told them that. Now he starts telling them what they need to know. What they need to know. They need to know about Jesus. Jesus was from what town? Nazareth. He's called a Nazarene. I guess if we were using terminology like that today, we would be a Tupuloene or Veronaene or wherever you happen to live. We don't word it like that. But in the event, as we said Wednesday evening, Jesus was a very common name in Bible times. Much like, Martha or Sue or Bobby or James is a very common name today, Jones and Smith and so forth. So to distinguish one Jesus from another, they often would give the town they're from. And that's the explanation here. Jesus of Nazareth. In our country of 330 million or so people, do you think that somebody else in this land has your exact name? First, second, and last? Unless it is a highly unusual name, there are several Thomas Wayne Coxes in the United States of America. I Googled. Just Google your name, and you may find things you don't want to know, people you don't want to know, but there are a lot of folks who have your exact name. How on earth, then, does a government distinguish one Thomas Wayne Cox from another? Social Security number. Nobody in this country or on this planet, for that matter, should have the same SSN as Thomas Wayne Cox does. Which means you had very well best protect your SSN. Wasn't that long ago in Mississippi that our driver's license number was what? Social Security number, and people started wising up and said that's really not the most secure way of doing that, so we better change that. So again, in Bible times, there are a lot of folks who have the same name, so to distinguish, they didn't have SSNs or ID cards or anything like that, but they would often either give a name and surname, or they would tell the town the person was from. Jesus was born in Bethlehem, but he grew up primarily in Nazareth. His home base would be Capernaum, and then he would die outside the city of Jerusalem. So a number of cities, important cities in Jesus' life, but his growing up years were spent in Nazareth. So Jesus of Nazareth, a man. He was a man. Talked about last Sunday morning in one of the lessons. If you were to look at Jesus on the street, in the road, would there be anything about him physically that would have attracted your attention? Did he have a halo on his head? Did he have wings on his back? Was he a hulk of a man? Muscles bulging here and there? We said the real beauty of Jesus lies within. Isaiah said there's nothing about Jesus' physical appearance that was handsome or beautiful at all. He was just an ordinary man, physically. He was a man. But one infinitely greater difference in Jesus than us is what? He was also God in the flesh. He was a man in the flesh. And just like us, he had a body that suffered, that ached. I'm sure he got blisters. I'm sure his muscles got sore and things of that nature. But he was God in the flesh as well. And so that distinguishes him from all of humanity. He was a man. He was approved of God among you. Instead of the word approved, do you have another translation of that word? Attested, accredited, all synonyms that mean the same thing. In other words, God proved to the world that this one called Jesus wasn't just a man, but was divine. And God's proof for that, miracles and wonders and signs. These are the three ways the New Testament refers to miracles. First of all, of the word miracle, we get the English word dynamite from this word in the original. And of course, dynamite, you think of power, correct? You may remember the Andy Griffith episode where the goat ate a belly full of TNT or dynamite, right? And they were afraid he was going to go off. Well, thankfully he never did, and that was just fiction. But power, miraculous power. Wonders, the word wonders would refer to the effect of the miracle on people. They saw these things, Jesus healing the sick and walking on water and raising the dead. That would make you wonder, wouldn't it? Your mouth would drop open. You would be amazed. So wonder would be the effect of the miracle on the people. And signs simply refer to the purpose of miracles. Signs were not given primarily to heal anybody or to raise anybody from the dead. Miracles were primarily given as a sign to show what? Evidence of what? That he's God. Exactly right. A lot of false and fake messiahs in that day, a lot of false and fake apostles, then and now. To distinguish the fakes from the real, God gave these miraculous supernatural powers that nobody else could do. And so line up Jesus against these false messiahs. He could do all these wonders, they could do none. And so that should prove to the people that Jesus indeed was divine. So God approved of Christ by those miraculous events. God did these in the middle of you, in the midst of you. In other words, we read elsewhere in Acts that Jesus did things not in a corner. A lot of these folks today who claim they can perform miracles will perform them in some far-off country, right? In secret places. And you just have to take their word for it that it actually happened. Well, Jesus didn't do that. I mean, he did it right in front of the people. It was undeniable. So he did this in the middle of you. You saw these things with your own eyes. In fact, as you yourselves also know. Even the Pharisees knew that Jesus performed miracles. They knew that. They could not deny his miracles. What they did do to try to discredit Jesus was to explain he performed miracles by the power of Beelzebub, remember, or the devil. He was able to do this by the power of the devil, the Pharisees said. So, of course, they were wrong in that, but the point is, even they could not deny that Jesus performed the miraculous. What man came to Jesus by night and said, "We know that no one can do what you're doing except God be with you"? Nicodemus, John 3 and verse 2. So this is common knowledge. Public knowledge. You know this. And we can take a cue from Peter in that he begins by talking to these people of things they already know. And he will transition from that to things they did not know. In our daily conversations, encounters with people, that might be a good way to start a topic about the Bible and things of that nature, starting where they are and with what they know, and then taking it a step at a time and transitioning maybe to some things they don't know. And that's just, I think a good advice and good example here from Peter. All right, having read now verse 23, him refers to Jesus, him being delivered by the determinate counsel and foreknowledge of God. All that happened to Christ was in God's plan all along. All along. It had been in the mind of God all along for this to happen to his Son. That he would be taken and that he would be crucified for the sins of humanity. We read of the first prediction of this in Genesis chapter 3, where God promised the devil that though you will bruise the heel of the Lord, he will bruise your head. He will conquer you, Satan. And I believe that's a reference to the devil bruising the heel of Jesus, having him put to death. But again, if you bruise your heel, that's not nearly as bad, bruising your head. I can walk with a bruised heel. I can live with a bruised heel. I can't live without a head. And so Jesus would conquer the grave, and I think that's the fulfillment of Genesis 3:15. But God had known this from all eternity. God knew this was going to happen, the foreknowledge of God. The determined plans and foreknowledge of God. Some people look at the foreknowledge of God and they see a dilemma. If God knows something is going to happen, it has to happen. Else he didn't know it. And if God knows it beforehand, and it has to happen, how can he hold these people accountable for the wrong that they did? Is how some interpret this. The Jews really weren't to blame, they would say, for doing any of this. They'll say the same about Pharaoh, the same about Judas, and on down the line. If God knew it beforehand, it had to happen, and therefore these people didn't have a choice, is what some would say. But really we can reverse that, can't we? We know what happened in the past. Did it happen because we knew it happened in the past? You knew that certain things happened yesterday, right? We know the sun rose yesterday because we know that it happened. Did we make it happen? Well, obviously not. Any more than God, knowing the future, didn't make anybody do anything in the future. The Jews were responsible, is the idea. And that's, Peter will drive his point home at the conclusion of his sermon. So God was not taken by surprise. You don't surprise somebody who knows everything. We are surprised, but God isn't. And so you have taken, and by wicked hands have crucified and slain. I highly doubt that there was a Roman soldier one in that audience on the day of Pentecost. Why would Peter say that those in his audience had taken Jesus and killed him? They were the ones responsible, right? Exactly right. They were the ones responsible. The Romans never would have done any of this had it not been for the instigation and hatred of the Jews. So yes, the Romans were guilty. They had wicked hands, or lawless. They were lawless men. They were Gentiles without the law. But that did not excuse the Jews, because again, the Romans simply were doing the bidding of the Jews. All were guilty. And as we know, we're guilty too, aren't we? We weren't back there 2,000 years ago. We didn't take a sledgehammer or a spike and drive it. And we didn't, in fact, tell any Romans to do anything. So how can it be said that we're guilty? Sins put Jesus on the cross, and we're all sinners. So we're all guilty. There's no escaping that fact. We're all guilty. And so we need the sermon just as much as these on Pentecost Day. So the bad news is you murdered the Son of God. What's the good news? Verse 24. God raised him up, whom God raised up, having loosed the pains of death, because it was not possible that he should be holden of it. They were no doubt surprised to hear verse 23, what happened to Jesus, God knew all along. They were even more flabbergasted, no doubt, to hear verse 24, that God brought him back from the dead. A question circulating in the city of Jerusalem and surrounding environments: what happened to the what of Jesus? The body of Jesus. What happened to the body of Jesus? That was a question. That was a question on resurrection morning, correct? Everybody went to the tomb. He's not here. No body was there. The women came there to further embalm the body of Jesus. Though Jesus himself had predicted he would come forth from the grave, they didn't believe that. So they come to the tomb and they wonder what happened to the body. People are still asking that question today. Where is the body of Jesus? And again, there's so much hatred toward Christianity. We tell people, if you want to disprove Christianity, it's the easiest thing on the planet. Just produce the bones of Jesus, and that'll be the death knell of Christianity, because Christianity hinges on the resurrection of Christ. Now, if Jesus were a fake, as the Jews proclaim, then produce the body. I mean, you know he died, you know he was placed in the tomb. If he's a fake, then give us the body. That they did not do. Well, rumor went around, it was in fact started by the enemies of Jesus, that what happened to the body? What rumor were they circulating? The disciples came and stole it, making it look like Jesus came forth from the tomb. We know the disciples did not do that. Why? What about the tomb when Jesus was buried? They put a Roman seal on it. You break that seal, you die. Not only that, they put a squad of Roman soldiers there to guard the tomb, risking their life in the process of allowing somebody to take the body. So the enemies of Jesus didn't steal the body, they'd have produced it if they had and shown Jesus to have been a fake. The disciples didn't steal the body, they couldn't have. That's why people were bribed to say they stole the body. And so the answer is, you didn't find the body of Jesus in the tomb because God raised him up from the dead. The body, the physical body, was raised from the dead, having loosed the pains of death. P-A-I-N-S. Anybody have a different word instead of P-A-I-N-E-S? I'm sorry, P-A-I-N-S. Birth pangs, P-A-N-G-S. Now, pangs and pains sound an awful lot alike. And this word is actually refers to the birth pains a mother has upon giving birth to a child. Labor pains, if you will. What Peter is doing is he's comparing Jesus in the tomb to a baby in the womb of a mother. Now, you mothers know this. When it comes time for your child to be born, can you hold it in? It's time, right? You better get to the doctor, hospital, or it's coming. The same principle was true when it came to Jesus. When it came time for him to be brought forth, death could not grab hold of him and keep him there, is what Peter is saying. No matter how secure they made that tomb, death could not hold on to his body any longer. Somebody said the abyss can no more hold the Redeemer than a pregnant woman can hold the child in her body, is what Peter is saying here. It was not possible that he should be held by death any longer. Now, we try to emphasize this whenever we talk about the resurrection, and so here. We're talking about the physical body of Jesus coming out of the grave. Some interpret this resurrection to mean, well, Jesus' teachings were resurrected in the minds of the disciples. That's what the resurrection means. Or Jesus was symbolically resurrected in their hearts. Well, that's blasphemy. The body, the physical dead body of Jesus came out of the grave, still bearing the scars from the resurrection. If we deny the resurrection or try to explain it away symbolically, again, we do great disservice, in fact, blasphemy to the teachings of the Bible. And so, one day we too will be bodily raised from the dead. Whenever we die, our physical body, whatever our loved ones decide to do with our physical body, it's up to them. Doesn't matter. Whether they bury us, or cremate us, or scatter our ashes over the sea, or whatever happens to us, the physical body, it does not matter. We'd want to be sure we're dead, obviously, before they do anything with us, but after that, that's up to them. Doesn't matter. Our body will either be, again, cremated or put in the ground or whatever. Our spirit will go to God. Resurrection time comes, there's going to be a reuniting of those two components of us. The body, no matter how, if it's turned completely to dust, God will bring it forth to be reunited with the spirit. That body will be changed and then face eternity. We're talking about a physical, bodily resurrection. All right, any thoughts down through 24? I think there's a period there.
I mean, you think about it too, the fact of the matter is they're having to be told that the man that they waited generations for, they're the ones responsible for putting that very important person to death. And like, I know, like, for us sometimes it may be hard to feel the weight of what Peter's saying here, but you have to keep in mind that these people had waited hundreds of years for this guy, and now they're having to be told, not only is he dead, but you put him to death. And at least to me, it's hard to understand the weight of having to be told that.
Right. Yeah, they had waited so long for the Messiah. Every woman wanted to have a boy in hopes he might be the Messiah or one in the line of the Messiah. And now, all that wait, we put him to death. And it's gonna have an impact, isn't it, on them? We'll see at the conclusion. Ma'am? Many Jews are still waiting for the Messiah. They reject all this. They don't accept any of the New Testament or any of this. He's an imposter in their mind. Prayers for them and everyone who denies the deity of the Lord. All right, Adam 25 through 28.
For David speaketh concerning him, I foresaw the Lord always before my face, for he is on my right hand, that I should not be moved. Therefore did my heart rejoice, and my tongue was glad. Moreover, also my flesh shall rest in hope. Because thou wilt not leave my soul in Hades, neither wilt thou suffer thine Holy One to see corruption. Thou hast made known to me the ways of life. Thou shalt make me full of joy with thy countenance.
Okay, so again, David quotes somebody the Jews loved. He quotes who? David. And this quote comes from where? I say quote reference. Might be a better word. Psalm 16, 8 through 11. We don't have the time to turn there, but again, we're not talking word for word. We're talking a reference to that psalm. So I saw the Lord. David speaketh concerning him. The him is who? The Lord, not himself. David's not talking about himself in verse 25. In other words, he's not prophesying of himself. He's speaking of the Lord. I, David, foresaw the Lord always before my face. In other words, I put my complete trust in the Lord. He's my shepherd, Psalm 23. He's on my right hand. In other words, He's always near, so I'm not going to be moved. 26, that made me glad to be in the presence of God, to know that He cares for me. And it should make us happy as well that the Lord is our Lord. And God, our Father, takes care of His children. This is my Father's world. Why should my heart be sad? My flesh shall rest in hope. In other words, because God is my Father, the Lord is my God, He certainly is going to sustain me. But now 27, David speaks of Jesus. He transitions to Jesus. This is a quotation. Thou wilt not leave my soul, and Adam used the word Hades. In verse 27, the King James has what word? Hell. Let me diverge for just a moment here. We know the Lord never went to hell as we use the term hell today. But it does bother me to have people make fun of the King James translation and say that this is a mistranslation in verse 27, because that's simply not true. You have to ask yourself, what did the word hell mean when it was translated in 1611? People want to take language of 1611 and compare it to the language we use today. And if the language we use today doesn't mesh up with how it was used then, we say that was a mistranslation. It wasn't a mistranslation then. The word hell in the Middle Ages meant many different things. It did mean a place of eternal punishment, but it also meant to conceal or to cover. Football players wear what on their heads? Helmet. Hell meant to conceal, to protect. Okay? In Europe, farmers would hell their potatoes. Wintertime came, they'd dig a hole in the ground. They would cover, conceal, and protect potatoes by digging them. They refer to that practice as putting their potatoes in hell. Not in torment, but to protect and to cover and conceal those potatoes. Back in 1611, to cover a building with a roof was to hell the building. Cover it up and conceal the inside from the elements. Roofers were not called roofers then, they were called helliers. Helliers. My point is that when this was translated, the word hell then was used in different ways than it is used now. So it is not a mistranslation of the word. We don't use that word today like that. And so we would use the word Hades. It means unseen. The unseen realm, just like their word hell, meant concealed or hidden. So didn't mean to verge or preach a sermon on that. But back to the quotation, Jesus would not be left, his soul would not be left in Hades. We know that when Jesus died, he and the thief went where? Paradise. The penitent thief went to paradise, Hades, the state of the dead between death and eternity or resurrection. And so the prediction is Jesus' soul would not be left in Hades. Why wouldn't it be left there? Resurrected. He's going to be resurrected. Neither wilt thou suffer. God would not allow thine Holy One. Who's the Holy One? Jesus. God would not allow his Son to see corruption. So Hades is not going to keep hold of his spirit, nor will the grave be able to corrupt. We don't say corrupt of a body. What do we say? Deteriorate, decompose. When Lazarus died, Jesus' friend, he'd been dead how many days? Was it 4? 4 days? And Jesus spoke of raising him from the dead, and one of the sisters said, no, not now, because what? He smells. What happened to Lazarus' body? It was already starting to decompose. That was no problem with the Lord. But here, even with Jesus' body, it did not start to decay or decompose rather. And so 28, thou hast made me, David says because of that, thou hast made known to me the ways of life, thou shalt make me full of joy with thy countenance. In other words, because God can do that. Now the question is, did David know as he wrote those words exactly all the details of this? I don't know about that. I don't have the mind of David. But he is referring to something through prophecy that would not happen until, 1,000 years later. So if he actually understood all these words, I don't know, but we understand. And Peter understood, and his listeners can understand. And so Peter will say, David's not talking about himself. David's not talking about himself, his soul, his body. What happened to David's body? The tomb, by the way, is still in Jerusalem today. If you go on the Bible Land tour, it doesn't cost you a dime to get in. You will have to put a covering over your head. They'll give you one. I'm assuming with COVID that they give you, I don't know, but you can't go in without a covering. Men and women enter separately. You don't go in together. That's their rules. But you can go and visit the tomb of David today, just as they saw it then. The remains are still in that tomb. So he's not talking about himself, he's talking about Christ. Out of time, we'll look at verse 29 Wednesday evening. And